In addition to storing ATP, the mitochondria has another couple of jobs. The ATP is stored there because cell respiration occurs there, and that's breaking glucose down into ATP. One glucose molecule is going to give us 36 ATP. But there's another job, and we said that your mitochondria came from your mom and it's got its own DNA, but there's one really important job, and that's called apoptosis. Apoptosis means programmed cell death. Programmed cell death means that every cell has a certain time that it will die. Now, what happens with cells, and you'll know this a little bit later, but some cells are meant to die sooner than other cells, and there's a timetable. Your red blood cells, for instance, only live for 48 hours. You get new ones because you produce them in your bone. Well, apoptosis is controlled by the genes that are in the mitochondria. So what happens is when the cell is supposed to die, the genes in the mitochondria direct the death. Now, if something happens to apoptosis and that cell does not die on time, then it might start dividing out of control. And if it starts dividing out of control, we know that's a disease called cancer. So very often, especially at St. Jude, what they do with these kids that have certain types of cancers, they start looking at, well, is apoptosis happening like it should be? Because if it's not, and the cell's not getting the signal to die, then it's just going to keep dividing and dividing and dividing, and that's going to be, a tumor and causing cancer. So that's a very, very important role of your mitochondria. The rest of them underneath, proliferation, heme synthesis, and regulation, don't worry about those right now. We will talk about these later when we make proteins, but for right now, it's not important that you know that, but do know apoptosis. All right, there are these small sacs called vacuoles inside of the cell, and they're not really organelles, but it is worthy of talking about them. One of the things with plants is that plants have this huge, large central vacuole, and it fills with water. But in humans or in animals, the vacuoles aren't that large, and they're more of a storage part for molecules, for ions, for some some enzymes that we need. They just tend to be little storage areas. But in plants, the plant actually has a very, very large vacuole, and it's for storing water. So this just says that most animal cells have got very small vacuoles, but in a plant it takes up a large portion of the cell. Here's a plant cell, and this is the large vacuole, and it fills up with water. So when you water your plants, this all gets full of water, and the plant stands up and is erect and looks really healthy. But if you don't water your plant in a while, then what happens is it uses all of the water out of the vacuole for photosynthesis, and it shrinks, and then your plants start to wilt, and they look unhealthy. And hopefully you can get to them in time and water them, and the vacuoles will fill up and they'll be real perky again, but very often that doesn't happen. So one of the differences between animal cells and plant cells is that plant cells have this huge, large central vacuole, whereas animal cells do not.